Good morning. Um, this is a special morning. Sean Marie, if you would stand, please. I know I'm going to embarrass you. And then you can sit down. Eddie, Dale, and I, and Sean Marie's family was here Wednesday night, 8:15 p.m., 9 o'clock, and Sean Marie was baptized into Jesus. And Kristen and Matt, just want to let you know, Kathleen was sitting with me. That's the reason why we're not sitting together in row 7. I go to Burns Tavern regularly in Stamford. It's an Irish bar, and I've developed a number of friends there. And today, Kathleen Burke, one of my friends from Burns Tavern, is joining me. And I want to say, Kathleen, I'm really honored that you came. In preparing for this talk, I shared with some colleagues at Stanford Hospital that I would be preaching this morning from Genesis 1. One colleague said, "You should start your talk by swirling your arms around to convey how the universe began." And so I'm going to tell Margot next week that I did that. We chuckled a bit. But I think that Margot was onto something, because in a sense, that's how I had pictured God doing it. God in God's own essence, creating the heavens and the earth, separating the darkness from the light, naming one part day and one part night. And then I recalled a conversation with Shelba Taylor, a former member of this church family, about a month and a half ago when I was visiting her in South Carolina. At one point, while discussing our church goings on, Shelba said the following, quote, "The Stanford Church is a good place for messed up people," unquote. Later on in that conversation, Shoba said that maybe she was speaking too sharply. And I countered her saying, "Shoba, you could not have given the Stanford Church family a greater compliment than that it's a place for messed up people." Scientists say that there are between 200 billion up to 200 trillion galaxies. Ours is the Milky Way. It's one of them. Scientists say that up to 9 galaxies are observable to the human eye. And myself, who's about as scientific as a snail, I have only one word for that: cool. If I were doing this talk 45 to 50 years ago, I would have focused on the how of the universe's making. Irrespective of my lack of knowledge regarding the beginning of the universe, I would have been certain of everything I would have been saying. I may have spoken up about what little I knew about intelligent design. I would have been defensive regarding anyone attempting to say that God was not responsible for creation. And that would have been to confirm to others who were not believers that I was a committed Christian. And I would have missed the ball. Genesis 1 is not about trying to confirm faith or religion. It's about way more than that. Genesis 1 is about something greater, actually, someone greater. Genesis 1 is about the nature, the power, and the love of God. And it's not just about how the world was created, it's about how we were created. It's about how God trusts us to begin again and again and again. Genesis 1 is about the dynamic nature of God. Genesis 1 is about God's identity and temperament. Genesis 1 is about the animating power of God. Genesis 1 is about God's goodness. Genesis 1 is about my favorite word, pulchritude, the pulchritudinality of God. And pulchritude is the ugliest word for beautiful you will ever come across. But this morning, I revel being part of a church family where it's okay to ask questions. I revel being part of a church family where it's okay not to have all the answers immediately off your tongue. I revel in being part of a church family where it's okay to wrap yourself into the mystery and mysticality of God, where it's okay to trust God's dynamic nature, where it's okay to trust God's temperament, where it's okay to trust God's animating power, where it's okay to trust God's goodness, and where it's okay to trust God's beauty. Maybe the earth's formlessness and emptiness mirrors what Shelba said a month and a half ago about the messed upness of our lives. Maybe it mirrors the constant need for the Spirit of God to hover over the waters of our own lives. If the world was created from chaos, does that not mirror the chaos we sometimes feel in our lives? As the darkness was over the surface of the deep, does that not mirror the darkness we experience, as Annie and Kate mentioned today, the darkness we're experiencing today, whether the darkness is personal, political, military, or congregational? How dark was the darkness? In 1973, I had the opportunity to go into a coal mine in western Pennsylvania. The owner of the mine, and I went in maybe around 1 o'clock. We got on the little rail to go into the mine, and we slowly wheeled into the mine. It was a bright, sunny day, as I recall. We then get to the entrance of the mine, and we have to turn our headlamps on. We go in, and our lights are on. And we go deeper. The light's still on. I look back, and the light fades from the entrance. As I focus forward, I could see the seams where the coal has been taken from the mountain. I remember thinking something like, if the beams don't hold this mountain back, this is where I'm going to be and never to be found again. And then I thought of men who would never be found due to mine explosion or mine collapses. But we continued. Finally, we came to the end. We arrived at the point to where the coal was still being mined. And then my friend said, "Now, let's turn off our lamps." I can't describe to you the feeling of the blackness of that moment. I put my hand in front of my face, and I could not see any outline of my hand. I've been in dark places where I could still have a sense of the outline of my body, of the outline of my hand. But that time, in that place, I saw nothing. I only saw darkness. And I think that that moment comes as close for me to my imagination of the darkness hovering over the waters. Let there be light. And there was light. The light was good. The light was separated from the darkness. Light called day, darkness called night. When we turned our headlamps back on in the mine, the feeling of being enveloped in the darkness was gone. But here it is, some 50 years later, and I remember that darkness like it was yesterday. It was night in that mine when we turned off our headlamps. And as we returned to the mine's entrance, seeing its opening and returning to the bright sunlight outside, a feeling of thankfulness arose within me. A thankfulness of having been entombed in the darkness. A thankfulness for the artificial light of the headlamp. And a thankfulness for the sun's natural light of the outside world. But you might ask, why be thankful for having been entombed in the darkness of that mine? As we went deeper and deeper and deeper into the mine, and while the headlights were on, I could still feel the darkness creeping upon us. I knew that the headlamps only prevented the darkness overtaking us. And I think that's kind of how the way darkness works. It doesn't overcome you immediately. And one doesn't give into the darkness so voluntarily the way we turned our headlights off. I think that trip in the mind mirrors how darkness creeps into our lives. We slowly rail toward the darkness with a bit of light available to us until one day we are so completely enveloped in the darkness. And then the work of the darkness is complete. But there was light. I can't consider Genesis chapter 1 without considering the first few verses of John chapter 1. John 1 also begins with the words, "In the beginning." John speaks of a light for all of humanity. And that light was in the beginning of time. How? I don't know. But that light was there. No, it's not a light like the headlamp toward the mine. It's way greater than that. This was a light to illumine the human spirit. And it was a light that would not only shine in the darkness, it was a light that the darkness itself could not overcome. I think of my conversation with Shelba Taylor 2 months ago again. That the Stanford Church is a church for messed up people. Stated another way, the Stanford Church is a place where people can bring their messed upness of their lives. They can bring their darkness, so to speak. They can find light, and the light they find cannot be overcome. And furthermore, the darkness of every person within this church family is overcome by the light, and we do that together. John points to Jesus as that light, the Jesus whom we as a church family aspire to emulate as we live. And we emulate the way of Jesus imperfectly. But we're also enveloped in that light. The hope for us, indeed the hope for the world, is the light of Jesus. Jesus' light, hear me clearly on this. Jesus' light does not have to be forced on anyone. But if we live our lives the way Jesus encouraged, people will be attracted to it. If lived out the way Jesus encouraged, the Stanford Church will be even more attractive to those whose lives are messed up, to those whose lives are not put together, and to those whose lives are searching for something greater or yet someone greater than themselves. What does the light of Jesus do? It lives in us in such a way that whatever darkness has enveloped us is overcome. And that really isn't that much different than what occurred in Genesis chapter 1, I believe. Sure, it's not the stellar chaos of the universe's beginning, the universe being brought together, but it is the stellar chaos of light and life being brought together on a cellular human level. And it's in communion with each other as fellow passengers as we go in this world. So this light that has come is not the light that's been illuminated by the Hubble telescope or the James Webb or the Compton Gamma Ray or the Chandra X-ray or the other 25 space telescopes observing the universe. No. This light illuminates the human spirit to light itself up with the one who called creation itself into being. And as we get to be in that light on a daily basis, in Scripture, in relationship, and in this faith community. My question, where would we be without this light? The call this morning is simple. It's for this church family to acknowledge God's dynamism. It's for this church family to acknowledge God's temperament. It's for this church family to acknowledge God's energizing power. It's for this church family to acknowledge God's goodness and to acknowledge God's beauty in relationship to the however billions or trillions of galaxies there are in existence. And more importantly, it's for this church family to acknowledge the centrality of God's light to our very lives. In this lies hope for the world. In this lies hope for us. When God's light shines within us, even our messed up lives becomes attractive.